Hi, I'm Trinity and back with another video. If you followed along the first tutorial of the series, you should have ended up with something like this. We have a simple exciter that produces some clicks, and a resonator that is excited by the clicks and adds a tonal aspect to the sound. In this episode I will demonstrate some possibilities how the resonator part can be refined and improved. But first let's hear a short preview of what it's going to sound like in the end to keep everybody motivated. Okay, let's start. For the next steps, let's remove all voice layers besides one, so that we can work on only that. Later we will add more voices again. One thing I forgot last time is to set the mix amount of the resonator bank to 100%, which I think sounds better. Because you don't hear the clicks anymore. What I want to show you first has more to do with sound quality. Maybe you have noticed that the overall sound is kind of dull. To get more high frequency content, the natural solution is to add more bands than the 6 we already have. So first group the resonator bank by pressing Ctrl G and duplicate the layer with Ctrl D. We already have the fundamental as well as the 2nd to 6th harmonic covered by the first resonator bank. The 2nd resonator bank we can use for the 7th and above harmonics. To make things more clear, I rename the effects layer to resonator and the layers to bands 1 to 6 and bands 7 to 11. Let's have a look into the macro inspector. As you can see, for the 2nd resonator bank, the modulations for band frequencies 2 to 5 are already assigned, but they are not at the right values. We want them to equal the 7th to 11th harmonic. I already prepared the converted values inside the grid as shown in the last episode and renamed the modules for better overview. So we can copy over the values. By the way, the transpose module, which I use to convert the frequency ratios to semitones, only goes to maximum value of plus 36 semitones, which is a frequency ratio of 8 to 1. For the 9th to 11th harmonic, I combined 2 transpose modules and a value readout respectively. The value readout I set to semitones. Then, for example, 9 to 2 in series to 2 to 1 results in 9 to 1, and so on. This is a very nice trick to keep in mind, I think. In the case of the value readout modules, it's not possible to copy the values, so we have to type them in manually. Next, let's set the band gain values. First, set the gain of band 1 to minus infinite dB. We won't need the fundamental twice. For the bands 7 to 11, we can type 1 to 7, 1 to 8, and so on. Now let's compare how it sounds without the upper bands and with them. We can hear how this makes the sound a lot brighter. But let's move on to the interesting stuff. For now, the band frequencies are spread as overtones using this macro here. But the idea is to add a 2nd spread type and morph between the 2 types. For the 2nd spread type, I chose to distribute the bands in octaves. So let's duplicate the spread modulator and rename the copy to octave spread. For the time being, set the original macro to a value of 0%. To save us some work, in the device inspector we can control drag from the overtone spread to the octave spread. This way we can copy over all modulation amounts, but we want to change them to be in octaves. So the first should be 12 semitones, the second 24, followed by 36 and so on. For the last band you should notice that it automatically corrects the value because we reached the maximum here. But it's not much off, so I think it's okay for what we want to do. Let's listen how the octave spread sounds like and compare it to the overtone spread. Now that we have the two spread types, it would be nice if we could morph between them seamlessly. So add the vector 4 modulator and open the device inspector. There we drag the OT spread to the top left modulation source and the octave spread to the top right modulation source. Now we can delete both macros. The XY control of the vector 4 modulator now changes the spread amount in the Y direction and the morphing in the X direction. The value ranges go from -1 to +1, but I think it's more appropriate to have them ranged from 0 to 1, so let's use an XY modulator for that. Also, we can start to add all relevant sound parameters as remote controls. First, add a new preset page. Then assign the Y and X parameters to the page. And rename them to spread amount and spread morph. Also assign the resonance as a remote control. A thing that is also quite common in modal synthesis is to have some separate control over the even and odd bands. So let's add an additional macro for that. Rename it to reduce even and set it to 100%. Modulate the gain of every second band so that the macro fades out only the even ones. When listening to the result, you can hear that this parameter can thin out the sound, which might be a useful thing sometimes. Here I want to mention that from a usability perspective it's better to set up macro controls so that the intensity of the sound increases with value. To stick to this design principle, let's use a second macro to invert the range. Call it even amount and add it to the remote controls as well. Another thing, sometimes we might want to control the overall pitch of our resonator, both of our resonator banks together, so to speak. So let's add another macro to do that. Set it to bipolar, rename it to resonance transpose, apply the modulation to the transpose knob of one resonator bank with an amount of 36 semitones. Then right-click and copy modulation to all layers. Now it also controls the second resonator bank. Add the macro knob to the remote controls as well. There is one last thing I want to introduce in this video. For now, when we play a note, the sound will continue to ring out no matter when we release the key. But sometimes you might want to have more control over the release time, as you have with other synthesizers. Here I will show you a cool approach to do that for our modal synth. For this we will use the grid, so we need to put the resonator into the effects slot of the polygrid device we already have. Also, let's be precise and rename the polygrid device to Modal Synth Voice, as it contains both the exciter and the resonator now. Inside the grid, add a gate and a modulator out module and connect them. Then select the resonance macro and move the mod amounts from the modulation source to the modulator out. Now when we play notes, the resonance is set to 0 when we release the key, which is the typical behavior of piano-like instruments. To get control over the overall resonance value again, add an attenuate module, set its value to 0%, and modulate it by the resonance macro. Now we can get more control over the resonance during release using a value scaler module in front of the attenuator. Set the high level to 100%, and the low level now controls how much percent of the resonance is kept when the note has been released. So set it to 0% and add another macro. Rename it to release and assign it to the low value with an amount of +1. And again, add it to the remote controls. Now let's see and listen how the release macro works. Now finally we can duplicate the voice layers to play our modal synth polyphonically again. To briefly conclude the tutorial, in this episode we extended the resonator with some additional features. First by adding more overtones, then adding a second spread type, and a smart way of morphing the sound using an XY control. Then we added some more macros, one for controlling the amount of the even bands, one for global transpose, and another one for controlling the resonance after keys are released. I hope I could give you some inspiration for your own modal synthesizer design in Bitwig Studio. Of course, there are many other possible ways, but I leave that up to you. In another upcoming episode, we are going to have a look at ways how to extend the exciter. Have a nice time until then.